Started.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Good morning from New Jersey. I'm Christine Nicholas, and you'll see that we have a great panel. Welcome to 11 Ways to Solve Recruiting Challenges. I am so happy to be with these guys this morning. Here's Jess Oberto. Can you put your hand up, Jess? Everybody sees who you are.
Hi,
Jess is our Director of Process Engineering. She's going to lead the comments for you today. So as you make comments, you can direct them at any one of us or the whole panel, and Jess will make sure that we get those. In my bottom right, always in a good position, Matt Charney. For those of you who don't know Matt, I'm just going to flip us along. So there he is. What did I put down here about you? So I noticed that you posted something this morning from Jerry Crispin, and I just wanted to tell you that I was talking to Jerry Crispin. For our viewers, if you don't know Jerry, he's the legacy proponent for talent acquisition. And he actually said to me 2 weeks ago that Matt Charney is the best writer in talent acquisition. If you don't know Matt, you're obviously interested in this. Follow him, follow his Twitter. He's the only reason I'm on Twitter. Follow him on Twitter. He's got a lot to say, and he's pretty much always right. I'm going to say pretty much because, right, we challenge each other a little bit. He's feisty. That's one of the reasons that we love him so much, and he really presents good thought around this topic of TA in general. Over to my left, Lorna Hagen. There she is. So Lorna is Chief People Officer, probably one of the most brilliant people I know in TA. She's on the cutting edge. She gets it. She stays there. She works at it. I don't know anyone who's ever met Laura who doesn't say brilliant. She's smart. So we're just really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And I love that the banter that we did in the warm-up between Lorna, Matt, and myself, challenging each other to get better at what we do, period, right? So I think we're going to have a good panel. You'll notice that Eileen Kowalski from General Motors, TA operations leader from General Motors, is not on. Unfortunately, Eileen is in Orlando. She's been texting me all morning and trying to get herself and her family through a hurricane. So we're letting her off the hook. Although she is one of the most tenacious and brilliant people in process engineering and TA I've ever met, and she's going to try and jump on. First of all, let's hope that she and everybody else in that Florida area and East Coast receiving the hurricane are in good stead. Okay, so without further ado, let's start to take a look at these 11 reasons. I do want to start by telling you, where do we get our data? Thank you, Matt, for reminding me yesterday to make sure that I do that. If you aren't familiar with people science, I started the company in 1997. We're 25 years old. We are a talent acquisition consulting firm. We were founded on that first. So our first position within the industry was, how do we help companies create a well-oiled talent acquisition machine? Departments, how do they get better? How do they conquer specific recruiting issues? We quickly, and I mean by quickly, by the first 6 months that we were open, became what is now known as an RPO. So those same clients would say, thank you for setting this up. This is great. We don't have the internal talent to execute. Can you put a team together and do that? So the data that we're going to share today is based specifically from Q1 21 till now to keep it relevant. Some of it is challenged by previous data that we've collected, but it is based on the commonalities from partnerships that we have in the RPO world and the consulting world. We do have data that you'll hear us talk about internally at People Science, but for the purpose of this presentation, all the data that you hear is going to come from actual clients. It's a combination of both high volume and higher talent, lower volume positions. So we do a mix. We actually have the company kind of divided on both sides, but collect the data and bring them together, and we can also provide it separately. Our data is gathered by our own proprietary system, which we've just taken to market, HireGate, as well as our client's applicant tracking system. And then I say single data collectors, including spreadsheets. So when we look at an organization, we know the kind of data we need to collect. Their ATS may provide 70% of that in some cases, some it may present 10%. So HireGate is our technology that augments that and allows us to look from recruitment planning, recruitment processing, recruitment skill sets, CRM, all the way through to the ATS and at the end. So we get a complete cycle, and that's where this data is predominantly housed and aggregated. Not every single one of the 11 ways is present with every client. So I won't tell you that every client does every one of these things, but they do it at least to the 25% mark of efficiencies. So nobody here is ignoring these. They are better at some than they are at others. Okay. Anything I missed there, Matt, Lauren, any questions? Okay. So the first and the foremost, and let me apologize, we're going to send you these slides. So all this data you're going to have, we are using them as a guide sheet. I hate to have a lot of data, but I wanted to make sure we're sending you the same thing. But discovering the root cause, number one thing. So when we walk into an organization, it's hard for us not to have assumptions. Let's say, for example, the challenge is that they have a churn and burn machine. They're turning at 120. This is a true story, burning at 120% in their call centers. So why is that happening? And we got a voice from the business, we get a voice from training, we get a voice from talent acquisition, and we get a myriad of voices within the voices. What we know is those that are successful have really taken the time to do the work up front to discover what the real challenges are and challenging your own assumptions. The way that we do this is through the recruiting continuum, which you can see on your screen. This is also available on our website. When we send you the deck, you'll see it'll be embedded in there. But the recruiting continuum allows you to take a high level view of what's really going on in TA. One of the most common things that I get is, we just need another software. And Lorna, you work so closely with the C-suite. I mean, you're seeing the same thing, or?
I'm seeing the same thing, and I'm seeing, I think many of the people on this call will know that a new tool comes out, and someone from left field will come and say, "Let's go explore that." And what I would say is, the tool that works for you today is the tool that you should focus on while thinking about what you need for the future. So don't make a change because something new is on the market. I mean, we were still on, frankly, ADP as an HRIS. It worked for us. There was no need to change until there is. And so that's what I would say, especially on TA tech, which is so dynamic and is changing all the time. The responsibility is to make sure you know what's out there, but that you're running your process and this continuum, effectively today while you're thinking about the future.
Yeah, and I think taking a high level is something, and Matt, you and I talk about this all the time. Talent acquisition within the organization is the only division in many, many organizations that it's just go find me talent.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And so I think to the point, technology generally tends to be sold as a solution. A solution solves the problem. And I think that the root issue often is that you're trying to actually put in a solution without having a problem, which is going to create an actual issue, right? So that's a huge roadblock. And I think to the point of this continuum, one of the most important but overlooked things is that people rarely map their process. And by that, I mean the continuum, but every kind of touch point along the way to identify what these issues might be. And almost always, when you break down what can I be doing, what's necessary, and essentially how do I make this most frictionless, hiring experience possible? Because you want to go seamless. And anytime you add a technology, that's actually adding friction for the most part. Now, it can end up saving time, but most of the time it's just adding complexity, which is the antithesis of what you're trying to do. But at the heart of it, it's almost always a process issue, and it's almost always a process that can be eliminated. And I would say 90% of the time, that's going to be the result of a talent acquisition audit.
Yeah, and we just had an instance a couple of weeks ago where we're now shortening time to fill by like 2 days because it was a process issue. It is so much easier to fix a process issue than it is to challenge your technology and try and make a change. Look at your internal talent and see, oh, these are all good components. So I guess, the lucky win is when you find out it really is a talent process issue. And when you go to the continuum on our website, you'll see that we have a broad view, for example, under define and attract, under your actual recruiting execution, interviewing, offer and background, onboarding, employee, how the performance is holding up, your communications. And you can actually go in and grade yourself based on these categories. So the categories are better defined on our website. That's a whole other presentation. And we'll be doing another one. We do these about once a quarter, presenting the continuum. So we'll make sure and get an invite out. But this is a good place to start. It does give you that high level look. Okay. Streamlining processes. Well, there we are. I think we just kind of covered that, right? It's, a lot of times we're just too busy doing the work. The amazing thing for me when we go into implementation is that recruiters are just, they're working and working. And they get comments like, you're not working hard enough, or you're not working fast enough, or I don't have the right story. So they're constantly in what Covey would call, right, this fight and flight quadrant 1 mode, where they've got to keep putting the fires out. When they're doing that, they cannot look at the process. In fact, they marry that process. They don't want to change anything, because changing anything means that they're going to be up another hour that night trying to meet in some kind of a goal. So I don't think that we can always depend on the recruiters to say this is a problem with the process, but we certainly can't ignore it when they say this is a process issue. But sometimes just enlightening them that they're subject to their process allows them to do that. Jess was part of process engineering for us. Anything to add to that?
I think just definitely stepping back. So, the recruiters are in the seat, they're in the weeds doing the work, but having a really strong team lead or a client service manager to look at the data, look at how things are moving with recruiting, and then being able to, like we said, go to the recruiting continuum and dissect the process step by step, see where the data looks a little off or where there's any flags, and then having a strategy team there to make those changes. So recruiting can keep moving, but that things are being fixed along the way as you're doing the work.
And can I just add something to that, which is, when we use the word process, I think our minds immediately go to technology and tactics. And I think you have to start with your recruiting team, right? How much energy and money and time are you spending on making sure that they have the right scripts, that they have the knowledge, that they understand where the pipelines are? Like, there is so much enablement that has to happen for recruiters that I find companies rarely actually think about. They think about the end result, which is getting candidates, but not how they're going to get there. How they're going to get, this is a sales job. How do you do sales enablement so that people understand the end result and they're able to help guide through? Like Christine said, they can tell you where the process is broken, and sometimes even more importantly, with a really strong lead, they can start to see where certain recruiters are kind of gerrymandering the process to their own personal advantage. And so really making sure that you have a kind of an eagle-eyed view from the top. They have the absolute, really saleable points around how do I talk about this company? How do I sell this company? Am I scripted appropriately for different jobs? And how do I go to market with a story that's right? And then what do we build for them to help them get through that? I think I don't want to lose sight of that, because I think sometimes when we think about streamlining process, it's all about the stages, and this first stage of enablement is the most important one. It's basically saying, do I have the right ingredients to make the most beautiful, delicious dish? Sorry, we just came back from a food vacation, so it's all on my mind.
And it's lunchtime, so.
Yes, and it's lunchtime on the East Coast, right? Good morning, by the way, on the West Coast and Mountain. The other thing that I'll add to that is Lauren is a chief people officer for many years. A lot of times that challenge is the disconnect, right? So if you were going to open a company making widgets, then everybody in the organization would understand and be involved. Finance would be involved. Certainly your vendors would be considered important. There's a lot of ingredients that would go into making these widgets or cake or whatever we're going to call it. I like cake myself, but there's a lot that goes into it. But you would see involvement all the way around. This not good enough, not really part of HR, and certainly not part of sales that happens with TA, leaves TA out the wind without that process consideration. Again, it still goes back to just find me people. And I've got to say, the profession itself doesn't always help itself. There's a lot of lone soldiers, even working in a team within an organization. There's a lot of independent recruiters. Okay, Matt, there's no degree for talent acquisition, none. And look at the state of our economy because of employment. And I know we've had these discussions many times that it's not just our organizations are really starting to feel it. And when you look at the amount of jobs that have closed as compared to the amount of jobs that have filled, even in last month's report, what that tells us, particularly in some of the technology sections, which we'll talk about those layoffs in a second, but they're actually pulling back on their ingenuity. How is that not going to catch up with our GDP? When companies are saying, okay, it's too hard to hire for this, I can't find the talent, I don't know how to do it, they pull back on hiring and they stunt their growth. And all that about streamlining, right? But it's a good start. Okay. They are pipelining, just need to move this, creating pipelines for future fits and future hires. This is a topic that we went over yesterday. I certainly want to hear what you guys have to say about this, but just for our definition purposes. So when we say pipelines, we certainly are building tangible pipelines for clients. And that is key. It's one of the things that you lose if you go with an outsourcing partner who doesn't allow you to keep the data that they're collecting for you, or you go with any kind of contingent firm. So that's something to really keep in mind in our, okay, yay for us, our RPO solution, big sale point here. We're collecting data for you. But as your own recruiters are recruiting or anybody's recruiting, if you can manage to keep your own data, because what we're seeing across the board in talent acquisition is, it is these pipelines. It's who knows you. It's who wants to be a part of your organization, what the sentiment is. So if you start to think about your new hires in the next day and the next year and the next 10 years, you need to think of them like customers, like you're your own brand, which is where your employee value proposition is where you start everything. This is who we are as we are an organization. And the red flag that I would mention there is so many times we'll go into an organization and they'll say, this is our EVP, and we're sure of it because senior management has established it, right? And then we go in and we find out that's not it at all, because internally it's not there. Your EVP is truth outside. It's who you really are. It's not easy to do that individually. Almost always needs a really good outside perspective. It is part of our implementation, but even on our own, we brought partners in to help really establish EVPs. Which, Lori, you've done a great job with that. Maybe you can talk about that from your perspective.
So, one of the things that we find, that's super important. And in fact, we did this work. I did this work with Christine at one of my former companies. And right after we had been through really hard times, we worked through some layoffs and we were forging a path to profitability. And Christine and team came in and really helped us do a full audit and really figure out what the value prop was for this new phase of this company going forward. And what we found was that even with kind of the hardships of what happened, there was still enough goodwill internally and in the market for us to start building just a mini internal CRM to this point of people didn't want to join today. But there was enough there that if we continued to reach out to them every quarter, every 2 quarters to say, hey, don't forget about company X. We're still around. We really like what you're doing. We're super interested in keeping a relationship as opposed to that like hard sell. People were always willing to give 5, 10, 15 minutes to hear what was going on. And then what happened is we saw them start to refer people that they knew. And then eventually we got some of the original ones that we really wanted to come back. But it's knowing that, hey, this is it's relationship building, right? So we talk a lot about EQ in the workforce, and for your recruiters, I would say double down on RQ, which is this whole idea of relationship quotient, because that's what you really want them to be really, really well versed at and that they want to do. Right, of everyone that I interview in HR, the only ones I ever want to hear say I'm a people person is the recruiter. Everybody else don't say that. And so this idea of how do I authentically talk about where we are today as a company, not the aspirational or not the what was. I've worked at both big and startup companies, and there's a lot of lamenting of what used to be. Get over that. Like, talk about today, have your eye again on the future and what you're building towards, but sell what's real today. And I think we're in kind of stage 6. We'll talk about this idea of new employee turnover. But if you talk about today and you're honest about what the value prop is today, your chances of retention increase and that relationship quotient is magnified. And that all is part of your EVP.
Yeah, so I'm going to actually take a little contrarian view here. So I think that EVP has changed a little bit, particularly with the distributed workforce, right? When work becomes something you do and not somewhere you go, there's a big change. And I think what that change is that it's, I love that the concept of like relational intelligence, right? And I think that to that end, that's what's going to define somebody's EVP is the relationships that they have with people at the company, rather than an overarching value prop that's going to unify people. I think it becomes a little bit more individualized depending on what that person is doing, right? Because their relationship with the company's changed. But when we look at pipelines, taking a step back, we talk about creating efficiencies. I actually think that if you use the metaphor of a pipeline, like what happens if there's one little hole that comes in the pipeline, right? Which will happen, then it empties out, right? Like, and so you're continually building infrastructure. I think that the better metaphor, although I abhor extended metaphors, is actually looking at creating a data pool rather than a pipeline. Because here's the thing, it's incredibly inefficient to continually be getting candidates for individual roles and, working them for potential future opportunities. We live, talking about technology as a solution. One thing I can say that we do, unlike artificial intelligence or some of those fun forward-looking things, one thing we definitely have an easy time doing is creating rich profiles based off of historical data. As you know, if I have an email address, I can essentially find out what you're doing now. And, if I gathered you as a candidate 3 years ago, I can update that, and that's fine. So I think our focus should actually be, rather than finding qualified people, segmenting them and delivering a message, get as many people as you can to take a marketing speak. There's no such thing as a bad lead. And then from there, refresh the profiles when necessary, when that hiring picks up and you already have a pipeline and that's publicly available information.
No question about the fact that it's changed, that the EVP has to keep changing. I still think there is this entity of the company that's important, but you're right, it's waning. Like, I think especially when we look at what's going on in the tech world right now. It's interesting because in the last 2 days, I've gotten some questions from companies, clients that are saying, well, now that Twitter's lost force and Facebook's laying off, can we target those? Not an issue there, but where the EVP comes in is this person a good fit for you? Do you understand what is a good fit for you, right? Like, even working with one large client that had across the board, so they have 300,000 employees, and across the board, it's a caring situation. That's their EVP. We care, we care, we care. When you look at their customer ratings, this is they don't care. So that's tough. So as they moved, they really embraced that EVP, totally backfired when they used it in recruiting because they started to look at Glassdoor reviews and customer service reviews. So we were getting a lot of backflack from the most sought out talent saying, these people don't even know who they are. So making sure that whatever you're putting out there has weight and truth and is validated, because the whole world can see what you're doing. The other ad that I would make on this, and we do have a case study on our website that talks about this, but a good example is we had a small $10 billion pharmaceutical company that we were working with, and they had a tough time finding salespeople because they were a heart company, a heart drug, and they were coming out with an infectious disease drug, so something they didn't know anything about, and they really needed 200 and then 400 sales representatives to go in theater, in hospital. It's a very close market. I think LinkedIn said there was 2,700 in the country. So what Jess and team cleverly did is we really created a marketing strategy, because we knew once we were live with them, our goal was to get them there in a 6-month window, and we knew there was another drug coming. 25% of the hires after 4 months were coming from candidates who said no the first time. So to Matt's point about it's a sale, it's a sale. You have to go above the noise. In this case, we were putting out all the information we could about where their stock was going. So there was a security blanket there. It was really targeted messaging. What's been interesting for me is that was maybe 2018 that we last counted that, but those numbers have trended the same. In between 22 and 25% of the candidates are coming from those who said no when we're in a marketing sense to a pipeline. And it doesn't really matter what the position is. It can be all kinds of positions, although the longevity could be longer, right? So it's not necessarily 4 months for everybody. But that's a pretty good number to know that 25% of your, up to 25% of your new hires are going to come from somebody that said no the first time. Okay, there we go. Boosting internals, is this what you were talking about, Lauren? Boosting internals recruiter success by supplying them with the right kind of tools and the right kind of support. And don't count on your recruiters to tell you that. I mean, there might be one that says, I need this, this, and this all the time. But for the most part, they are typically in this like hamster wheel situation trying to solve these issues. Even when unemployment is high, recruiting is difficult because just the numbers tell us we have this huge gap, right? Between the type of talent we need and the type of jobs that we have. It's always, always a tough sector.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also, and this is what I was getting at earlier, which is one is there's so much information that candidates have right now, right? They're going to the usual suspects, the LinkedIn's, the Glassdoors, Indeeds, the Comparablys, all of that stuff, on top of just general media and news about your companies. And that's all noise because none of those candidates are internal. They don't actually know what's really happening with that business. So they're taking little pieces of data and then they're making up their own story about your company. And the only person that knows how to actually say yes or no to that story is going to be your first point of contact. Your first point of contact is your recruiter. So does the recruiter understand all of the underlying concerns and opportunities with your company? Do they understand, hopefully there is a strategy where the company wants to go, and are they able to answer questions efficiently and cleanly and simply for candidates around the health of a company, right? Especially today where Facebook is laying off and Stripe is laying off and manufacturing companies are next and financial services after that, right? So that's going to happen and will continue to happen for a finite amount of time. And does your recruiter actually understand where the company is? And so I would say today, recruiting is not going to stop. I don't care what any of these companies say, recruiting never stops. There's always going to be a job that needs to be filled, a key man risk that left, and all of a sudden you have to backfill. That's always going to happen. So whoever says recruiting is stopped, that's just not the case. There is such a big responsibility to make sure that your recruiters are in real time getting briefed on the company and the health of the company so that they really understand how to be able to do that sell when they're talking to candidates. Matt, you're making a face. I don't know what's happening over there.
My interior monologue generally is not reflective of external stimulus. I apologize. No, but just on this point, I think, everyone says like, oh, we're heading into times of uncertainty. And actually that's wrong from a talent acquisition viewpoint. The degree by which things will happen, we'll see. But you continuously see a cycle of boom and bust, right? And if you look back, this most recently happened in 2020. And what companies do is the first places that they cut are recruiters. And that is because, we don't hire. So then what happens is as soon as hiring starts picking back up, they have to hire recruiters that end up with less internal capabilities to do that, which then exacerbates the talent shortage problem. So if there's sort of one thing I can say, RPOs give you absolute flexibility. They're great for kind of that feast and famine. But the one thing, to your point, in addition to the fact that recruiting does never stop, right? Companies will not completely ever shut down their career site. That's when recruiting would stop. And I've yet to see that, right? I do think that to the point of sectors, I think you're going to actually see a little bit less of that right now than you are specific economies. Look at the companies that are like laying off people in tech. It's all Bay Area based. So I think you're going to have much higher market kind of effect there. But beyond that, the one thing you can say is that you're going to have to hire again. The key to doing that competitively is to have really good frontline recruiters. And if you cut them to temporarily save costs, the amount of hole that you're digging yourself in the next time it inevitably goes up, then, you know, the worst problem you create. So my advice is to retain your employees, which is kind of everyone's goal, even in a hiring freeze or slowdown. You're going to have to upskill and provide people with dimensional growth opportunities. And that's where recruiting can really come in, because the one thing that they generally tend to know better than anyone at a company is how to manage your career and what it takes to get hired. And so I think playing the long-term game is playing to a 100% inevitability, which is what goes down must come up and vice versa.
I love that. And I love this thing that you said about, you know, one of the ideas when I called Christina, it's because we actually, and this was a mistake, we shut down the recruiting crank. I mean, shut it down. And I called her because I just couldn't like get it going fast enough. And the learning there is it was a fintech company. I should have kept people, recruiters, experts in technology and in finance and risk. Everything else I could have probably just sent to RPO and then crank that up or down as needed. And so giving your recruiters the right support is you don't have to be expert at all of the verticals that you're recruiting for, but where do you want to be really great at? Where is your business? What's your differentiator in terms of what your business is about? How do you keep those people? And then when you need to augment and provide additional support, how are you looking at the right partnerships?
Yeah, and to add one thing just on economic conditions, high volume is going to continue to be in high demand, and that's just going to ramp up. And I think if you're not relying on an external partner for high volume, then you are doing yourself a huge disservice regardless of internal capability.
And thank you for that, Matt, because every stat. So, and we do understand, right? I don't know exactly how many layoffs we're looking at right now, but we still have, you know, as of 2 weeks ago, 4.8 million more jobs than we did people on unemployment. That means we have to lay off about 3 million people to make a significant dent, right? So you want to look at the macro, but you want to look at how it applies to you as the micro. But I think one of the biggest elephants in the room that we encounter when talking to companies is that, what do I do if I don't have any open recs with these recruiters? And that always leads me back to, look, this is a profession. And if you haven't learned since 21 how crucial your recruiting staff is, you've missed this huge window of opportunity, right? If you're thinking in terms of the continuum, and it's much more sophisticated than just find me a person, you can have your internal team work smart on these type of things. Re-examine your EVP. And I encourage you to go to the website and take a look at this. More importantly, I encourage you to give us a call and we'll go through it with you. But really taking a deep dive into what is a stellar, well-oiled, high-functioning talent acquisition team look like, because it's a lot more than that. Then you'll find that you really don't want to let your staff go. And I know, Lauren, I know this is of interest to you, and I don't think we still have ever done it, but we have a very good program called Cost of Vacancy. And during the pandemic, you know, we lost 75% of our clients in 2 weeks. Or you're like, nobody's hiring. And we weathered that storm, which was pretty incredible. But one of the things that I had to do was run my own cost of vacancies. How much is it going to cost me to lose this recruiter is how I went into it. And it really, so yeah, I've been presenting cost of vacancy for maybe 10 years before that. No, it's great. No, it caught on and I saw how it worked. Doing it for yourself, whole different experience. But I can tell you, I was like, I could not afford to lose almost anybody because I knew things were going to be turning. And then where would I be, right? So again, elevating our profession, which is, you know, what these kind of calls, what these kind of webinars and information shares we're trying to do, is to understand the importance. And if you're just getting started, I know there's some startups, I know there's some restaurateurs on here that are trying to get these things started. Start with that whole well-oiled machine and your EVP and these good practices in place, and you'll be way far ahead of some very significant organizations that still don't get. So they can give you an incredible edge. So just to sum up, make sure you get your recruiters the help that they need and you're not just forcing them to perform, right? Okay, what's next? You've got to know what your recruiting market is and quickly. So our organizations are becoming the competitive lead. You've got to. Now that doesn't mean Harry is right for you. It might mean Sally and Jesse are, but Harry may not be a good fit. But you need to know who Sally and Jesse are, and you need to target them, and you want to be the first person they think of. So by really understanding who you are in the market and then saying, this is how we're going to compete for this talent, that's where your win lies. So when we look behind these successful initiatives that we're doing, we're able to build that for them. And that goes back to sales mentality, right, Lorna? You wouldn't go into sales and not think about your competition.
Absolutely, and I would say there's a piece to augment here for the recruiters too, which is how they're selling. How do you enable them to do that? And influencing. How well can they influence hiring managers? Because hiring managers, until the end of time, will always believe that they can get 10 out of the 10 skills that they wrote in that job description, and it's just not true. Right? So how well versed is your recruiter at the ability to suss out what is critical and important versus nice to have and important to the hiring manager? And I think looking at those and helping them then see and identify where the market is and where, to Matt's earlier point, where the pool is the deepest. And then how do you get them to be able to influence on decision making, knowing that hardly ever is someone going to hit the imagined bullseye, because I don't ever think they're the correct bullseye.
Why are you laughing, Matt?
No, I just like that we talked about process. We talked about, how to improve metrics, how to improve like employee brand perception. I think it was first time hiring managers came up. So I was just thinking it was long overdue. Yeah, but they are sort of key to everything that we talked about, right? And so going back, I do think that, yeah, this is the one I would underline, right? Because I think what Lorna said earlier, I used the word gerrymandering. And I love that because like it is the perfect description of that gatekeeper mentality. And I think that the more autonomy, like we try to centralize and guard power and really be the gatekeeper for a hiring manager. I think the key is to actually give as much of your district up as possible. To continue that metaphor, because at the end of the day, like the more that they are happy, the more you've done your job. Everything else aside, quality of hire gets defined by two people: the person being hired and the person doing the hiring. The person doing the hiring is way more important, and they're also going to be a key candidate for you in the near future, regardless, right? So work that relationship as much as possible. Take care of a lot of the issues we just talked about.
I cannot express how important this is. So we jump to number 7, building hiring managers. Behind every successful initiative, you're going to see hiring managers' trust really moving all the way up past the 90 percentile. So we actually grade. So for one client, we have 236 contacts in one client. We look at that. I personally, the teams present that to me once a month. I look at what is the sentiment of each one of these individuals, because one squeaky wheel, I mean, it's just like social media in our relationship will change everything. But I can also tell you that more times than not, when we come into a relationship, it's because they don't like what HR is doing. HR doesn't like them. These two are combating back and forth. It's like, you're the hiring manager, but I hate you because you're mean. and you're the recruiter and you're not getting me things fast enough. And it's just this constant clash, and each one trying to build their own case. So what's really been the catalyst for change, because we come in and they're like, oh, what next? Because most of the time we're recommended. And I can tell you, when we come in through operations, it's much easier, because operations, yes, let's all get on the same page. And usually HR is like, yes, we, okay, we'll take it because we want to get rid of it and we can build allies with them. But when it works in the opposite, we come in with their legacy. Like I was saying yesterday, it's kind of like Here, people science inherit our neurosis, right? And you just do it instead of us. So you take the beating every night by the hiring manager. It really is like that, right? So the first thing that we have to do is figure a way to build trust. And the number one way that we do that is through good metrics. When you can say to a hiring manager, the cost of vacancy is $300 a day, and you aren't going to interview for the next 2 weeks, it's costing blank. Now, you don't say it like that. You've got to build their trust and build a relationship. But when you can use metrics to make your case with them, and to come back and say, here I gave you, here's these 6 candidates, we haven't circled back, when's a good time? Or it's simple as managing their calendar for them and setting up good processes so they can make the interview. Many times, the gap is the HM. So you've got to educate them and know that. And then on the other side, I think the big understanding is for the recruiters, a lot of times you start to interview and that helps the hiring manager determine what they want. So unfortunately, they don't come in and say, I want a Matt Charney, and you give them a Matt Charney. They say, I want a Matt Charney. You give Matt Charney, they say, I want Lorna Hagen. And that's how they figure it out.
Yeah, much better hire, I'm sure, ultimately. But the one thing, so here's the other key, I think, to this, and it's overlooked, is the most important thing to build the hiring manager's trust is competency, right? And beyond data, beyond anything else, like you have to know the business. The more that you can have the opportunity to spend time either with them or get an understanding of like what goes on a daily basis, kind of, to the point of sentiment analysis, like what really goes on in the department, like, kind of all that, those hidden variables. Once they feel that you kind of get it, then you have a lot more latitude to operate. And I think the other thing that, is very important is every single requisition should have an intake or kickoff or whatever you want to call it meeting. But when you talk about controlling the market, what I think has been really successful in controlling expectations is saying, okay, I'm going to look and I am going to talk to a bunch of people. I'm going to present you with this amount of candidates by this date, and you're going to select from these. Does that sound reasonable? You almost always get a yes. And then I guess bigger market conditions control the flow because they've already agreed to look at 5. So essentially what you're doing is just narrowing their choice rather than leaving open-ended saying, okay, will you consider this person? Just saying these are the people who you have to consider. We agreed that, you would, take this many people by this date. And that right there, I think, makes a lot of the market variables inconsequential.
And here's a big cheat sheet for that, right? So we create an interview guide when we do the intake call. We play it back to the HM, so they're agreeing. So as they're going through the process, they're like, oh yeah, well, I don't want somebody who wears a cap, so I don't want Matt. Well, then we add that as one of the ingredients. Does that make sense? That's a great cheat sheet. If you really establish an interview guide, everybody buys into it. This is something that we do all the time, and we actually have it in HireGate. Lauren, I think they had something like it in Greenhouse, but we did augment with our own stuff at On Deck to really help do that. And I know that that was a catalyst for really bringing those things together. It's like, oh, wait a minute, I did agree with my recruiter. So now it's up to me too, to kind of have an onus instead of point a finger.
I love that, and taking what the two of you have just said together, my biggest advice for a TA function, and certainly for individual recruiters, is don't be a hero. Actually, a hero is like the worst thing you want to be in any sense, actually, in business. And be clear, be smart, be fast, and set the right expectations from the very, very, very beginning. I think that's one of the most important things that you can do.
Exactly. And then they change. So be Gumby too, right? We jumped past a couple. I'm just going to see if I missed anything, but I think we hit on most of these. And again, you're going to be getting this deck. Oh, I love this one though. This was really cool because I didn't see this coming, right? But when I went back and looked, everybody who's being successful is saying that they're taking some ownership on this employee turnover thing. The thing, and we've had accounts just to help reduce turn. What's interesting to me is that is not, and recruiting will say, that's not my challenge, right? But when they do say, it is my challenge, but it's not just my challenge. When you line the 3 pillars up, again, here's a big helpful hit. If you've got a turnover problem, look at the way you're recruiting them, make sure you understand your EVP. Is that following through in the training? And is that following through in the management? And by the way, it needs to start with management and come all the way through, right? So if I go back to another large organization, same one actually that has the CARES story going on, they also were having an incredible amount of turnover in one spot in a sales division, and went out and visited this guy, and he is what I would call a carrot and stick guy, but he is worth an incredible amount of money and they can't lose him. And the beauty of him is he's had the same 5 team members on his team for like 10 years, but they're getting old and they're retiring, and they just don't want to do the same where they're hanging in there. So we start to replace them, and it's just a churn and burn machine because the messaging from the organization is here and this guy is here. This is probably one of the most influential things that's happened to me in my own business, because we just did a flip and we said, we're not carrot and stick. The company's not carrot and stick. His name was Dave. Dave is carrot and stick. We found people who can only perform and have a lot of respect for carrot and stick, and they went turnover size. So the misnomer is A, the whole company is like that, and B, you can't really solve turnover from a recruiting standpoint, because once we took that deep dive and we said, starts with the hiring manager, onboarding carriage is the same message, and that's who we look for, we were able to increase the turn.
Well, I will say from someone who runs all of it, when I started to bonus my heads of TA on first year retention, there was a lot of pushback. And I said, I own comp and TA and talent management, learning and OD. Your responsibilities and mine are to come together to build one employee life cycle, right? That it's added to the continuum. The continuum is part of that life cycle. So you're all responsible to each other. And you really saw, to your point, oh, okay, we're going to recruit, how we onboard, how we train, how we think about retention, and they're not different disciplines. And so everybody is aligned to the same strategy. TA went into it kicking and screaming, basically saying, I can't control managers. And I was like, I understand that, but you're a part of my team and we're looking at everything holistically. So it's a huge change in mindset, but I think one that's ultimately really important to retention and employee engagement.
Well, and you don't have to change them. You just have to emphatically understand them. And we're all in empathy, right? And don't judge, right? You can't judge. And the other thing is there's a job for every person and a person for every job. It doesn't mean that I'm going to fit it. Well, in our case, okay, except for 4.8 million, there's a big skew there. But you know what I mean? Philosophically, there's a job for every person and a person for every job. Did we miss anything else on that? Oh, no. Okay, good. Here we go. I think one of the biggest losses that companies, particularly B2C companies, lose is that marrying recruiting to business solutions. Matt, I couldn't agree more, but look at some of the cool things that come out of that. If your recruiters are talking, whether it's email or on the phone or whatever way they're communicating, you can, and we've done this, you can throw things in there. I'm just going to make this up, okay? But let's say the Gap might want to bring back khakis. Well, the recruiting market, the people applying and the people they're reaching out to, stop laughing. I'm wearing khakis. No, I'm not. Okay. So say they want to think, oh, are khakis going to be, we can throw that question into the recruiting cycle and gather that data. And it does two things. It creates more loyalty with the recruiter and more loyalty with the customer because I am now involved in the decision process, right? So from a psychological perspective, we're building a loyalty. And we do know that once you empower your prospective customer, just like your candidate, like you would your customer, they become an advocate of your brand, even if they don't buy your brand, even if they don't work for you, even if you turn them down, they want, in my opinion, I'm important, I can contribute. So as we start to see this marriage take place and get closer and closer with the business, they work together on solves that really can make a difference.
Yeah, and just adding that, the one thing that I don't see enough of, but have seen employed successfully in the past is directly turning them into customers. So in Firebrand, big restaurant holding company used to do it. when they, knock candidates out of process, they'd send them a coupon, and the uptake was like 100% on that coupon offer because like they felt a connection because they had, interacted with HQ. So if you want like an immediate way to turn candidates into ROI and your B2C, include that at the end of the process, and you'll have something to crow about every single QBR.
I love it. And there's something else that you can do. If you're going into a layoff mode, you're going to hold up, have those recruiters work on that. They're pipelining and building customers at the same time. It's a new world. Okay. Wise and effective use of temporary suppliers, contracts, executive search, and direct hire companies, including RPOs. This is where I can sometimes cut my nose despite my face, but if I go back to who we truly are in a consulting sense, I see so many dollars wasted. Jess and I spent a long time meeting with a company that has 25,000 employees. They have a $65 million temp spend. Did a deeper dive, 42 million of that is because they simply don't know how to hire for those positions. They don't, and nobody wants to. So they just keep, and what happens, especially in the MSP world, right? When you have that kind of spend, you've got an MSP, it's going back to the MSP, and that group is almost always being led by purchasing. So they're not thinking in terms of how can we save dollars? They're thinking, and how can I cut the cost for contractors? So that broader picture, the continuum, the good work all gets thrown out of the window, right? At the same time, we have come in as an RPO partner and saved clients millions of dollars because they had too much of a contingent spend for the same reasons, and we're able to turn it around. So making sure that you really are making wise decisions. I'm not saying by any means that temp and contractors and executive recruiters should go to the wayside, because that is not my point at all. Just be effective. And don't expect your MSP or your supplier to tell you that. Two things. First off, it goes against the grain of what they're making, right? And the second thing is, when you look at outside providers, whether it's an RPO or a staffing firm or direct hire company, we are all different too, right? It's hard. If you lump us together, you make a mistake. I think one of the slides shows there's different kinds of RPO. There's different kinds of staffing companies. So a lot of times what we'll see is it's the wrong supplier. Maybe this was a good supplier for you for high volume, not so good on your tech side, and you've stretched the two and the thing blows up. So really understanding who the right ones are is where your big save comes in. Anything to add there, guys?
No, not. I would just say, the cost is generally going to be less important than the ROI. So cost avoidance is not ROI. So in this particular case, what you think might be the best option often isn't. Just because it's the cheapest doesn't mean it's going to have the best outcome. So you have to think in those terms, because sure, procurement may handle some of this. You're starting to see corporate TA take over a little bit more of this blended workforce. But at the end of the day, that has to be a finance argument, and it's pretty easy to win if you can connect it to qualified outcomes. So.
Yeah, if you know how to do it and you do it.
Well, and cost of vacancy, right? The idea of cost of vacancy comes right back around in this scenario.
Yeah.
I guess we're going to do cost of vacancy next for our webinar.
It's a good one, honestly.
Have you seen it? Have you seen me? I think I've only done it publicly once. It's been mostly for individual companies, but we can certainly do one. Absolutely. Cool. Okay, macro and micro data reporting. There's another technical page on here, but this goes back to what we've been talking about. So you've got Lorna and you've got the rest of the C-suite looking at macro numbers, right? And they're saying this isn't happening or this is happening. And down here, you've got your maybe your TA leads and your recruiters, and they've got a different thing that they're counting. What's important is the companies that are being successful understand how this trails up and how it trails down. So if your TA leaders don't understand what data is important to the C-suite, and right now we're seeing this across the board, they're like, just cut heads. This is going to cost us this much money. I don't care, just cut heads. Because based on the numbers I'm seeing, this is what it looks like. And particularly with finance. I mean, Jess, how about it, right? We have an account that we showed them clearly how they could save about $200,000 a quarter. And finance did not, they like contract recruiters. Finance did not like the idea of RPO. They weren't moving on that. They were not moving on it. consequently, they spent a lot more money in that arena. And now that their market's tightening, they're like, we're just going to let all the recruiters go and dwindle it down. And we're very concerned about them. We're already starting to hear noise back from companies like that saying, oh my God, what was it, Twitter? Did you see this? That they started bringing people back that they let go last week?
Yes.
I mean, those are the decisions. There's a big disconnect there. So making sure that everybody understands, not saying that the C-suite needs to see all the tiny metrics, but the people doing the tiny metrics need to understand how it bubbles up and vice versa, it bubbles down. Again, not a big to do. You can get this done relatively quickly and it has a big impact. Okay, they're staying ahead of the curve, the technology curve, which is daunting because there's so much technology out there. One of the things we didn't touch on, and the panel and I talked about this yesterday, is that many times companies are subject to what their ATS tells them to do, even though it may not be the best solution for them or for a specific, right? You can't get an ATS that fits every single rec for you. They're all going to be a little bit wonky somewhere, right? And I wouldn't suspect that they should have to. But at the same time, we quite often see company after company with an ATS that doesn't fit this group or doesn't fit that group. At the same time, there's tons of apps coming into the market. Use this one, use that one. I was telling Matt yesterday, every time a new technology comes across anybody's desk at People Science, we bubble it up to our director of IT. He hates us for this. I know you're listening, Brian. I know you don't hate us, but kind of, sort of. Anyway, it's a lot of data and it has to be tracked, but it's a big arsenal, right? So we may say, wow, that technology might work here. And we have saved incredible amounts of money based on one technology, that ran $200 a month, that saved like $1 million by the end of the year, right? At the same time, I'm going to just tell you that most of the technology we see doesn't even work yet. It's in pilot mode. So they're advertising to get pre-revenue before it even works. A lot of the AI says it can, and AI has come a long way. Don't get me wrong, and it's worth looking at, but it's not the solution. I think back to Lorna's point, you need to have this combination of AI, standard reporting and collection, your own intelligence involved. It's not going to solve the question. And with that, I will say from a search perspective, it's gotten better, but anytime we run it against humans, it's not as good. It doesn't mean you shouldn't use it, doesn't mean it's not effective. It's just that there's a lot of new technologies getting a lot of funding, and I mean a lot of funding on products that aren't even there yet. So we try to keep track of that and ignite them when they can. Lorna, I know you have to hop soon. Do you have something to add?
I listen, this is, I said this in the beginning, I don't know where your companies are and in what stages, but certainly do not fight really hard to not lose your recruiters because you might not be recruiting the same volume. I mean, it's all relative. You might not need as many, but that doesn't mean, that there isn't work to do. Building your pipelines, understanding enablement. How do you repurpose people? Have your sales, have some of your recruiters work with the sales team and with your marketing team to really refine the language and the comms and the scripts and the EVP. Like, there's so much that can be done so that when you really crank that back up, you are prepared for what your new company looks like. So I would leave you all with that.
You're going to make a cake, right?
No, I am not. Thank you all. Thank you,
Laura.
Christine, Matt, and Jess for this. See you soon.
All right. So Jess, do we have questions there?
Yeah, I had a question from someone that said they are a new TA leader in their role, getting used to their team. They don't have a lot of reporting right now with their applicant tracking system. They're not sure what they should do or where they should start. Any suggestions?
I mean, I think they should schedule a call with us and we'll look at it with them, and possibly HireGate can be a solution for them. If not, we'll recommend what we think they should do.
Okay, great.
Matt?
So I would say, in the absence of existing baselines, then get them from your other departments. So the best one I can think of is like marketing. So if you think about a candidate as what we call a marketing qualified lead, excuse me, an applicant as a marketing qualified lead, an applicant is, or a candidate is a sales qualified lead, you can get to what the business is already paying to get people in through the door. And that's the baseline right there that you can use to, look at how to build against. So I would say use existing business benchmarks in the absence of TA specific ones.
That is good.
And our next question is, our budget is very tight right now. If there was any one place of the recruitment process we could focus and invest in, what would you say it should be?
So for me, that's not the most easy question to answer because there's no one size fits all approach. But the easiest thing I would say across the board to cut costs in is at an enterprise level, I should say, or if you are doing high volume, high turnover, is to buy your own media, because most companies go to either programmatic or an agency to purchase their job ads to try to be more competitive. But when you add the margins up there, oftentimes that represents millions of dollars a quarter in just margins that don't actually go to ad buying. And that's very important when it comes to talent attraction, obviously much more so than really any other thing to keep the funnel going. So build media buying capabilities in-house, because that's going to generally be the biggest source of spend in talent acquisition.
Yeah, and on those lines, really making sure that you're using the right technology, right? If you're a smaller firm or you're just getting started, you're using Indeed, make sure Indeed's the answer and not Simply Hired. There's some really good stuff going on TikTok, and the market for TikTok is just below and above boomers and just below Gen X, Gen X and below, right? So it's a good market on there. I've seen some really creative ads that are authentic, right? And I think the thing now is to be authentic. You know,
It always has been.
Yeah, as compared to just a coined ad, like your own people making a short video. A friend of mine, Dennis Yu, who's arguably one of the best marketers there is. Take a look at Dennis Yu, Dennis DEIN, Dennis Yu. And on his website, he's on there saying, if you're a candidate, this is what and you want to get a job here, do these things to get it easier. I mean, he's like, so here's the CEO saying, here's what you do to get employed. There's some really creative stuff you can do. But I got to tell you, I would drive you to the continuum, which is on our website, so you can figure out what process is off. That's not going to cost you anything. It's a good think piece, and that's going to help you discover where your challenges are.
Yeah, and I have to jump too. So thank you very much, guys. I appreciate it. And
thank you, Matt. Any other questions, Jess?
There were a few, but I will go ahead and send them email responses.
All right. Thank you so much for being here. It was great having lunch with you. I hope you're safe if you're on the East Coast. Always love seeing our friends on the West Coast. Be out there myself soon. We're right here if you need us. And this deck will be distributed to everybody who's been on the call. Have a good one. Thank you, Jess.
Bye.
Bye now.